Then we move on to the myth that entrepreneurs are extraordinary forecasters. And we start off with a few quotes. That idea is so damn nonsensical that I'm willing to stand on the bridge of a battleship while that nitwit tries to hit it from the air. That was Newton Baker, the Secretary of War in 1910, when he heard a suggestion that airplanes might sink battleships by dropping bombs on them. We don't like the sound, groups of guitars are on the way out. That was Mike Smith, who rejected the Beatles. And then we have this quote: with over 50 foreign cars already on sale here, the Japanese auto industry isn't likely to carve out a big slice of the US market for itself. That was Business Week in '68. And as you all know, these were not good suggestions on how the future would be. And it is extremely hard to forecast the future. And there was actually a mapping of 82,000 forecasts made by almost 300 expert forecasters. And they mapped these forecasts against real-world events. The experts were barely able to beat a random forecast generator. And in fact, the most famous forecasters did slightly worse than the average of the experts. And then we go on to this model. Here we have some strategies in respect to prediction and control, and we will go through them. If you have a focus on planning in your strategy, then you have a high emphasis on prediction and a low emphasis on control. And this can be done in mature, stable environments. Then you can have planning as the source of strategy, and it can be effective. Planning assumes that information, particularly historical information from the environment, is reliable enough to provide a base for your strategy, meaning that prediction is possible because the environment is so stable. In an environment where dynamic capabilities are key, you might choose a strategy of adaptation and learning. Then you have a view to outpacing the competition. Adaptation assumes that you are faster at responding to changes than your competitors, and you have a low emphasis on control and low emphasis on prediction. You do not predict the future and you do not control it, but you adapt quickly when you see the changes. In that way, you are outpacing your competitors. Then this visionary strategy, it calls for a high level of control, but also a high level of prediction. If a company has market power, it might be in a government-regulated market or a quasi-monopolistic market, where the company has a status of quasi-monopolistic. It might be, for instance, that you are Microsoft. Then you can try to dictate what will happen in the environment and impose your view on the landscape. And in that way, you ensure the position of the organization within that environment. And this assumes that you have enough market power to impose a solution on the environment. So you get to say that, well, this is what's going to happen next. And since you have so much market power, you basically decide the future and you control it. And then we have the effectuation quadrant. And that calls for a different approach. Because the company does not have market power, it cannot predict and decide what the market will look like. It instead has a high focus on control. So it will need to co-create with partners and customers and suppliers the environment. So together with the partners, the firm co-creates its environment and develops a new product, a firm or market from which all the players will benefit. Effectuation assumes that you will put together partnerships that will successfully create a new situation. So the entrepreneurs control rather than predict. And they do that by forming partnerships. They do it by limit what they might lose and risk. They decide upon how much and what am I willing to risk. And then they don't risk more than that. They use their own means and other people's slack, and they use the prices as something positive to work on, rather than something bad that prevent them from reaching that goal that is set in stone. And using other people's slacks, well, that is something that, according to Saraswati and colleagues, that is something that the experienced entrepreneur is quite good at. And when they want to get people involved, they do not take the measure that a novice might do that would be kind of giving an overly salesy sales pitch and offer something they themselves would want to get these people involved in their project. Instead, the experienced entrepreneur would ask the stakeholder what would convince them to come on board. And one example of this is a lady who wanted to go into business and she needed some legal advice. So she approached a lawyer, and he ended up giving her free legal services and free intellectual property advice in exchange for her tutoring his son and working with the son in order to write an application to the business school that this entrepreneur had previously gone to. So she had something that she was not even aware of, that she could trade with this lawyer for something that he knew about. Another example might be that someone might be willing to give up a higher salary for a title, and someone might be willing to invest in your company in exchange for some advice. You don't know.